Welcome everybody to this latest Values Jam guest session series. And Rachel, great to have you here today. Please, why don't you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, the great work that you do, and you're going to have to explain your backdrop.
I will, thanks. Thanks for having me here as well. So basically my background originally is as a dancer, hence the backdrop. But I'm currently teaching a summer subject, which is all about creative art. So I was just saying I amuse my students with lots of different interesting creative arts backdrops, and they always kind of enjoy these different things in our Zoom meetings. So as I say, my background really, well, I've danced forever, since I was very little. And I trained in dance with physical education because I was pretty good at all kinds of other sports and activities as well. I went on to teach for a couple of years in England, and then I moved from England to take up a post teaching the performing arts and physical education in the International School of Geneva in Switzerland, where I stayed. That was in a bilingual international school where I stayed for about 13 years, a long time. I loved it there. And then I moved from there into teacher education, and I've been in teacher education now for 19 years. And that's partially been 9 years in England. I worked at Bath Spa University, and I was teaching in dance and phys ed and education more generally there. And I do similar things here in Australia now. I moved here 10 years ago, and I work at Charles Sturt University here in New South Wales, which is sort of on the border of Victoria, New South Wales. It's a beautiful sort of regional area of Australia. And here I've sort of started out lecturing in human movement, particularly health, physical education, but now I've sort of moved more into the creative arts as I've got older, and also things have moved online, and I love the face-to-face aspects of moving and doing and practicing. So I teach drama and music and dance and all sorts of other things here now. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I've done a lot of traveling, not only through my career, but I've also been a consultant for Cambridge University for a number of years. And I've been to places like Mongolia and Kazakhstan and Egypt to help them reform and modernize and make their education systems more creative and interesting.
Wow, what a mix. What a mix. That sounds great. And actually there's a parallel here, because tomorrow we have a Values Jam deep dive conversation into the topic of education. And it's basically asking the question, how can the various stakeholders in education, whether they be students or parents or teachers or whatever it is, come together to create something different in the way of a system which is more fit for purpose and give more to the students. So looking forward to that. But anyway, for us today, we're going to dive into Values Jam. So first we need to choose a card. So can I ask you to tell me how many times you'd like me to cut this deck?
4.
4. Okay, so I've now got 5 piles in front of me. So would you prefer pile 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5?
4.
4, okay. And now I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 cards here. So number between 1 and 10?
Number 4.
Number 4.
It's my lucky number.
Okay, well.
I'm not letting that one go.
So number 4 is friendship. That's nice. The value that we're going to be playing with today. And the first question is this: what does friendship mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
It's an interesting one. Having moved around a lot over the years, I've really reflected on this quite a lot, in the sense that I've sort of lost friends over the years, just through the moving, prior to social media. And then I've sort of regained some of them through social media later on, which has been quite interesting. I feel as though, for me at least, I'm not a person that has masses of friends. I'm a person that prefers to have friends who are really authentic people, who are regularly developing themselves as I am. Friends, above all, I would say a quality that I would admire more than anything is trust, and of being able to share things with them and vice versa, and that going no far further than that. And I think that's a quality that in the past, when I was a lot younger, I think that was abused by some friends. And so I've sort of learnt the hard way that you know, certain people it takes me a while to trust them and to feel as though I want to sort of open up with them. And that's really important for me as a woman, but also as a companion to someone else. So yeah, I think that it's about trust. It's about also having fun and camaraderie, and being able to for them to sort of be able to drop everything at times and to support you in whatever way they can, whether it's a text or a call or a visit. All of those aspects are really important as well for me.
Yeah, you've covered a lot of ground there in a short period of time, and it strikes me that friendship is actually a more meaningful word than we sometimes think of it immediately. So when I was listening to what you were saying, I was thinking about friends that I have had, and like you said, then maybe lost touch with. And in fact, just yesterday, I had a call with a guy who I haven't seen for probably 6 years or so. And it's a kind of it started off as a working relationship and then grew into more of a friendship. And we had a call yesterday about a piece of work that we're going to be doing together next week, actually. And he just said, this is really strange, because it's almost like the time between us together last time and now, even though it was only a Zoom call, that time gap just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Do you relate to that in terms of when you have a friendship, it can somehow strangely be picked up, even though there's been a gap in between?
Yeah, that's happened to me quite a lot, because I mean, I only manage to get back to England from Australia every year or more. So it's always a while that I don't see certain friends. And also when friends live in different parts of the country in England, sometimes it's really difficult, because my family lives down in the southwest in Plymouth, and they might live in the north. So that's really tricky to kind of fit it in. If you're only there for 3 weeks, you've got to be traipsing up and down the country. So that's always a bit difficult. But I think that the friends, for me, the friends that I know in the Bristol area where I raised my children, they were really, really important to me. And I think because we raised our children together, because we had that bond where we helped each other out as women, and we really formed a tight village community. I think what happens is when I arrive there, it's like this magical flow almost of just being taken right back to when we were raising our children together and meeting at the school gate, and it's an immediate kind of warmth and love and an understanding of being a parent who has gone through the mill and back on many levels, but also celebrated as well. So there's these ups and downs that we all get as parents. So yeah, it's like yesterday, we sometimes just end up laughing, saying, oh, do you remember the time we stood outside the school gate and, you know, so and so showed up or didn't show up? And, you know, we'd be laughing about assemblies and nativity plays that went horribly wrong, and, you know, and those types of things, as if it were yesterday. So I agree with you. I think with good, solid friends that you've had that sort of history of ups and downs and in-betweens with, and you have that authenticity between you. I think that it doesn't matter how long you're apart at all.
Yeah. And there's I'm not quite sure where this is going to go, but I was brought up in Plymouth. So
Oh wow. Yeah.
so that's a bit fun. And
Yeah.
my best friend when I was a child, from the age of around about 7, who lived across the road, is now in Australia.
Oh.
And we hadn't seen each other for decades. And then a couple of years ago, he was over here, so we met up, and again, it was just like yesterday. And something else that you just touched on there around bringing up children in Bristol and the people that you that became friends then, it made me think that about what is it that causes friendships to start? Because sometimes it's like we don't go and choose our friends, do we? It kind of
No.
And just like you, I remember when our kids were at school, our friendship groups grew to a large extent around the parents of our children's friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really quite strange that you can become so close to people that you didn't choose, that kind of came about through circumstance. That's a bit weird, really.
Yeah, there is that. I've never really sort of thought about that really in any great depth of the happenings and how you meet people or not. I am a sort of person that is quite selective about who I want to be friends with because of having my fingers burned in the past, I suppose. But also because of the nature of the work that I do. I'm an academic, and so it's a really demanding role, and it often requires evenings and weekends and so on. And if you're going to spend an afternoon with a good friend, they've got to be worth it on the level of, you know what I mean? You're sort of ranking them and going, do I really want to spend my afternoon with so and so? Because you've only got that one afternoon every 3-4 weeks that is ever free. So that's where I go with it. And so it might just be that you meet them for a quick coffee, as opposed to spending 2-3 hours going for a walking talk in the wetlands or here or there or whatever. So you sort of like you change the amount of time that you spend with them, and or the venue of where you go as well. And my mum, bless her, she used to say friends are a bit like library books. You know, that actually was just talking about boyfriends at the time, but I'll put it into the friends context. It's not that she had lots of boyfriends, but she said she'd never found the perfect man. And so I sort of equate that to friendship, and I say, well, is there a perfect friend? And I don't think there is. I think there are aspects of friends that we enjoy and appreciate when we're in different moods, when we're in different circumstances, different places, etc. And so the library book mentality my mum used to say was, oh, you know, one guy for dinner and going out and having a nice time with them and chatting, one guy for going to see a show because they're really arty and they're going to appreciate that. So I kind of think, well, that's quite similar, isn't it? So how you meet friends and then how that friendship develops is actually a really interesting sort of pattern. And I think, yes, I do have quite a few friends from when the girls were small, but due to circumstances, sometimes you end up connecting with someone that you initially didn't think that you would ever be good friends with, because you're both placed in a situation that's quite difficult or whatever, and you just happen to have this corridor conversation with them, and then suddenly you go, wow, I never thought of her like that, you know, or him like that. They're just like, they're amazing people, and they have actually been through what I've been through, and they would be really good to talk about that further with. So I do tend to have more, interestingly, more girlfriends than boyfriends. But I would say one of my most valuable friends that I had for 13 years in Switzerland was a male. And he was 17 years older. And we just were the best of friends. He was almost like a sort of father figure to me, and we would do everything together on weekends and go cross country skiing and all sorts of things together. We were both very sporty. So how do you meet people? A lot of friends through the workplace, I think, potentially, although I try to keep that separate. I've got a couple of good girlfriends, and they're the only ones I would really connect with beyond work. The others I enjoy at work, but I wouldn't say they were friends. I'd say more they were colleagues.
Yeah.
And also definitely bringing children up. That was a major kind of like ballooning of potential friends. And other than that, I have actually been introduced to friends by other friends who've actually said, "Oh, you're really like one of my really good friends in Switzerland was called Amanda. Oh, you'll love Amanda," from my housemate. She's so arty. She's just like you. She's got a great sense of humor. And sure enough, Amanda and I are still beautiful friends sort of 30 years on, even though we live in different countries. So sometimes you can be with a friend who's not really your type, but they can introduce you to someone else. So that's quite weird as well.
There's something there as well about how friendships, I suppose it's obvious, but they're built on common ground. But I love the metaphor of the library, because what you described about how in the first instance, sometimes you don't realize that you've got such common ground with somebody. It's a bit like in a library, there is a temptation to judge a book by its cover, whereas friendship proves to us that that's not wise, because when you spend a bit more time with the book, maybe you find it a lot more interesting than you thought it was according to its cover. And then the other thing that you were talking about different friends for different things, there was, I can't remember her name. It's a consultant in the US, and I was talking to her a couple of years ago, and she was really strong on categorizing her friends according to what they were friends for. And I remember being really amused that she was saying, so for instance, you know, I've got this friend who is a dinner party friend, and they come around, we have dinner with them, and it's great fun, but I would never dream of spending time going for a walk with them. It would be an nightmare. You know? So she was very, very intentional about categorizing the books in the different sections of the library. And I can relate to that to a certain extent, because, for instance, there's a guy that I know, and we can go out socially and have a brilliant evening and have a few beers, a few glasses of wine, or whatever it is. But I couldn't work with him again, for instance. And I wouldn't really confide in him, but he's great social company. So it's kind of, you know, so where's the line there actually? Because on the one hand, you'd think that it is good to be intentional and understanding where people really have that connection with you. But then on the other hand, it seems a bit kind of clinical and not very friendly to view it in that way.
Yeah, and sometimes the reason I prefer a bit more of an organic framing of my friends, but I think sometimes it's circumstances that you don't actually explore the friendship beyond the going out for dinner or the walk or whatever it is, mainly because of your workload, your family situation, their family situation, their workload, etc., etc. So you're trying to sort of squeeze them in. Yeah, funny story. A good friend of mine from work, who we just got like super, super close during the pandemic, because I wasn't actually able to drop in and have a chat with her in the corridor, which we normally would do. And we often went for little walks around the campus when it wasn't too hot. And I missed her, and I didn't see her for up to 2 years. And she just was really good at reaching out. And some people are really good at that. Yeah. And I'm not so good at that. And I think that's related to my personality. I'm very warm and friendly and so on, but I also need a lot of quiet time, and I need a lot of healing time because of things that have gone on in my life. And I find that if I do get that time, that I want to just sort of down tools. But she was really, really proactive and always sort of checking in at least once a week and saying, how's it going, Rach? You know, and all of this. And I thought, gosh, that's a beautiful quality. And normally I wouldn't have had even kind of been cognizant of that, because we were in the workplace. And she was making an extra special effort beyond what was really needed, expected, whatever, because of the fact that we were all working from home. And I told her when I went back to work last year, sort of after that 2-year time, I said, you don't know how much that meant to me. I said it was, I said it was just beautiful. And it has really, I would say, deepened our relationship. So now we've sort of carried it on. Yeah. And she'll still do it, like, because she knows I loved it. And she'll check in on the weekend. How was your weekend? You know, and things like that. Or if she knows I've got a really difficult situation coming up at work or on a personal level, she'll always check in and so on. So, circumstances can make friendships evolve and enrich. And I think that that's something to bear in mind as well.
Yeah, you touched on two things there that I've read about. The first one is that it was an article which was saying that friendships are more valuable than we recognize. And you use the phrase, I think we sometimes kind of jam them in or fit them in or whatever it was.
Yes.
And this article was saying that that's normal. You know, that's often the way we go about our lives. But it was saying that we actually should pay more attention to our friendships and make more space for those relationships compared to our working relationships and even our family relationships, because they're so important. And then the other thing that I read about was the other thing that you touched on about reaching out. And it was saying that we really totally underestimate the power of reaching out to somebody else and how much it's appreciated. And you've just given a personal experience version of how much value you attach to it.
Yes.
It was just advocating that we are more intentional to do that because it's so appreciated by the recipient. Let's move on to another question then. So, where have you noticed a lack of friendship?
That's an interesting one, because having moved around a lot, I have picked up on that an enormous amount, because some places can be really, really cliquey. And so I would say another thing that's influenced that is the fact that I've been raising my kids. They're now in their 20s, but I've been raising them by myself since they were 5 and 6. And so there's that whole kind of cliquey thing about single mother stuff that still goes on in society. And so like the married people are sort of invited over for dinner and so on. And that is a stigma that I've endured, I would say, for probably 13, 14, 15 years of that. And also feeling quite alone with that on some levels, even though I like alone time. Because you're sort of, especially in England, 4 o'clock it gets dark in the winter and you close the door and you've got kids sleeping for the evening and you're stuck, aren't you? Yeah. So that sort of, that cliqueiness, I felt more than anywhere. I felt it in England. And I think that was because I had gone from this international community where I was married. And I had 2 young kids and everybody knew me. And at the time, my then husband, we were very well known as teachers. So there was this expat community and we were very nurtured and looked after and very much admired, on many levels, because we'd been there quite some time. So when I came back to England, I felt like a fish out of water because here was I sort of arriving and it was a tiny little village and it was like, this is so parochial. I don't know, they've all lived here for donkey's years and they've all married. They're all sort of like into bread and I was like, oh, the cousin lives up the road and the auntie lives down here. And I was like, this is a lovely, lovely place to live and it's quiet and it's gorgeous, but how am I going to break in to this community? And one of the ways that I did, it was quite interesting because again, it was just a mum at the gate. And I would stand there and I'd feel like a lemon, literally, just at the gate. And I'd be in my professional clothes, ready to scoot up the road to the university where I worked. And I just thought, oh, this is like so difficult for me. I'm not really fitting in here. And then one of the mums, again, it was like she was really good at reaching out. And I remember standing there for day after day after day, waiting for my daughter, and nobody really spoke to anyone. And I thought, oh, this is dreadful. I don't even want to come here anymore, And I remember one of the mums came sort of running towards me with her little daughter. And it's funny how you remember these moments, don't you, of joyous connection, and they stay with you. And she said, oh, hello, you must be Imara's mum. And I looked at her and I thought, who is this beautiful creature who is like just full of love and joy coming towards me? And she said, my daughter Olivia, and she explained, she said, she's got one of your daughter's drawings at home and I've never seen anything like it before. She said, it's a mermaid and she's got earrings and she's 5 years old, your daughter. How does she draw so well? I must catch up with you. Anyway, we became like really good friends after that. And then, funnily enough, she was this catalyst for me beginning a ballet school for young children, because she said, oh, Olivia loves, Imara. Why don't, I know you're a dance teacher. Why don't you set up a little school in the village? We don't have anything. And suddenly I was thrust into the bosom of the village because Rachel became the dance teacher. And so I'd gone from this sort of very frosty village parochial sort of, who on earth is that standing at the gate? Suddenly I was this one person did it. And she said, set up this dance school. Next minute, it was everybody knew Rachel. Everybody wanted their kids to come to the dance school. And I suddenly had sort of friends everywhere and connections everywhere from all the neighboring villages. So I think that's a really good example of us sort of leaving behind cherished friends elsewhere and then moving into a new context and just sort of feeling very at odds for quite some time. And then suddenly this sort of light shines, and it's rather lovely what rolls out from that.
That's a brilliant story. And how long ago was that?
That was when my girls were really small. So that was sort of like 2004. And I set up the dance school in 2005.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because what happens very frequently during these Values Jam sessions is what you've just experienced. People say, oh, I've just been reminded of this story. Mm-hmm. It might not have crossed your mind for many years, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And psychologist in New Zealand told me that it might be, didn't confirm it, but said it might be because values conversations are so deep. It might be that previously lapsed neural pathways are being re-sparked. And that's why the memory, which was either hidden or kind of distant, is suddenly being brought about again, which is fascinating. So we're now speaking to people that operate in the areas of dementia and Alzheimer's, because imagine in a senior care setting, for instance, people having a values jam with a fellow resident or a caregiver or a visitor, rather than somewhat trite games of bingo sometimes that they organize in these sort of settings. Yeah, anyway, I digress.
And so, music is a trigger for a lot of dementia and Alzheimer's patients. So, and they can remember whole songs and all the verses and everything, and yet they can't even remember their own son or daughter's names at times. So, and dance has been shown to be very similar as well, but music in particular has it's like that old Heineken, is it Heineken advert that says it reaches the parts that other parts never reached. Our brain can actually be accessed through the arts, particularly music, and there's been quite a few studies on dementia and dance and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's as well.
Yeah, I've started to read a few of those, and actually my stepdad's mum, she wasn't great with her mind, but she could still play the piano and play music, from beginning to end. And the brain is just it's just amazing. Now, on Values Jam cards, we also have the opportunity to ask our own questions. So this is kind of tapping into your creative side here a bit again. So could I invite you to ask your own question about friendship, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how?
To you?
To us.
Yeah, to us. So why is it that some friendships with the opposite sex are so difficult?
Ooh. So why is it that some friendships with the opposite sex? I think for me, it might be partly to do with the complication of a relationship moving from being platonic to being more than that. And I'm just trying to think of, my friends tend to be male. I think you said that most of your friends tend to be women rather than men. And I'm the same the other way around. I'm just trying to think back. I don't think I've ever had a really good friend who's been a woman.
Yeah.
And why is that then?
I mean, I don't believe in all that Venus Mars stuff, and now we know that there are multiple genders, and if you identify as or you feel as though you are, there's all sorts of complexities around gender now. But I just wonder why, and I wonder whether it is to do with whether it is basically to do with sex, in terms of you thinking that if a male comes and talks with you, that it's inevitably going to be some kind of sexual reason that they're doing that. And I feel like I had quite a difficult relationship with my dad, and I've often talked about this with my adult daughters, and I've said sometimes I feel as though that's had a kind of ripple effect in me, a young woman, as an older woman as well, that I'm very sort of distrusting of males as friends, and they, funnily enough, they're quite similar. And so they have very few male friends, and mostly female friends. And I just think it's really interesting, and I don't think there's any answer to it. Maybe, I mean, why is it that we can't pick out qualities of friends as opposed to focus on the gender or the sex?
And also, it strikes me that it's not logical, actually, because
No.
you might say, and this could apply to either of us, actually. So we say, well, actually, I'm going to steer away from friends of the opposite sex for the reasons that we've just said. So I'm going to focus on friends of the same sex. But who's to say that this person doesn't have a sexual motive for being a friend with you, even though they're the same sex as you?
Yeah, as well, layer in that too. And also, if you think about how we're socialized, people have often said to me, oh, because I had 3 brothers and a twin brother, and so I was brought up to be very, very physical, and I was always outside cycling and playing loads of sports and what have you. And my mom was very much, she was an athlete, and far more athletic than my dad ever was. So that kind of like wasn't a typical feminine stereotype that I experienced. And in a similar way, some of the women that I, enjoy their friendships, friendship with them, some of them don't have sort of typical feminine aspects to their personalities. They offer all sorts of gendered views. Some of them are, a lot of them are feminist, and quite rightly so, because I like strong feminist women in my life. But similarly, with my good guy friend in Switzerland, I guess I really liked him because he was just so gentle. There was a beautiful sporty side to him, which we shared, but he was just a really good listener, and very kind and very gentle with his understanding of the world. And that was sort of like something I really appreciated, that doesn't always come in a woman or a man or anybody in between.
Yeah, and I remember when you mentioned your friend first off, you used the phrase father figure, and perhaps when a friendship develops with somebody of the opposite sex who you regard in that light, it's perhaps easier for a friendship to emerge, rather than if you consider them to be more of a peer, if you like.
Yes, so age comes into it then, because he was like closer in age to my mum than he was to me. And he adored my mum. And so when my mum came out to visit, we'd always do things together. It was great. She was automatically included. And we would often talk about it and sort of say he sort of sat in the middle. Although he was closer to my mum's age, he was sort of sat in the middle. He'd be able to relate to my mum, but because of her being closer to her era, but then he'd be able to come down to my younger self and be able to relate to me as well. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's relatability.
Yeah, because the other thing on gender, the other thing that you've reminded me of is, if there's a dinner party or a gathering or whatever it is, quite often what happens is that there's separation according to gender, and the guys go off and talk about stuff, and the girls go off and talk about stuff. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, because it doesn't, but there is something there about that does happen frequently.
Maybe that's to do with the old when all the gentlemen would go off for their port and port and talk, and all the women would go off and do their embroidery together.
And it's ridiculous.
Maybe there's some ancient historical kind of intergenerational memories coming through there.
But there's no reason why in society today that should still be the case, because we do have such common interests cross-gender, and yet there's something there that is so strong that it still kind of happens.
And I suppose it's more reflected for me as well, and even at work, because I work in a school of education where the majority are female. I think there's only sort of like 1 or 2 full-time males in our whole school, and it was the same in England when I was there. So that's quite interesting, because I'm sort of surrounded. I've got 2 daughters, and then I'm surrounded by women at work as well. So I hardly ever see too many blokes really in my in my life. It's interesting. And yet, interestingly, on LinkedIn, there's a majority of males, aren't there? And so I've had some really nice connections with men on LinkedIn. They've messaged me, and we've had Zooms, and I've picked up work with them and research possibilities and all sorts. So whereas Facebook is a bit more female oriented, apparently there's far more women on Facebook than there are on LinkedIn. Yeah.
And maybe that, again, this relatability that you mentioned as being the kind of source of the beginning of friendship. So, we talked about why is it that you have more friends of your own gender. Perhaps this relatability thing is coming into play here again, because on LinkedIn, for instance, your perspective is you are connecting with me as a professional.
Yeah.
It's not because I'm a woman. Whereas if a guy came and talked to you at an art gallery, then perhaps you're thinking you're really connecting with me at a personal level. And why is that? It's kind of that thing. So the relatability piece is perhaps a key to this. So,
although you still get predators on LinkedIn.
Oh, do you? I don't know. I've not been. What's the verb of predator?
You've not. Yeah, no, I don't think there is a verb. A stalked.
Yeah, I've never been stalked on LinkedIn.
It happens. You learn to block.
All right, so let's bring this Values Jam to a close now, then, Rachel. And the final question is always the same. So, what are you encouraged to do differently about friendship as a result of our conversation?
It's interesting, because I was talking with my daughter today, funnily enough, about friendships, and so it's funny that it came up this evening, and she was talking about this plumber that an older male who'd come in and helped her with the flat that she's living with, and she ended up, her and my other daughter lived together down there in Melbourne, and they ended up going out for dinner with him and his 2 sons. And I laughed and I said, oh my goodness, you've made a friend from a plumber. Like, how did you do that? And we were laughing about it and saying how you can have these bizarre coincidences and you just get this vibe. She talks about vibes, Mum. And she says, I just got this vibe from him, and he was so cool. And then when he said, oh, if you ever want to come out for a meal or whatever, I'll treat you. You're such a lovely couple of girls, And then he said, what about tomorrow? And they went. And so we were talking about friendships, and I said, how lovely. I said, I bet you were a little bit nervous at first. How did you feel about being invited out? And she said, oh, we were both sort of dreading it at first, because we thought, oh, this is going to be so awkward, as they say, awkward. Yeah. We don't know them, and it's going to be really odd. And I said, you know what, sometimes, I said, it's really good for us to go and do something that makes us feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And I said, I've learned that through my yoga, through my mindfulness training, over the years that I've done that, sort of 20 years now. And I said, what is it about that anxiety and fear that is about, meeting a new friend or connecting with a stranger? And I was telling her about some research I'd read this week saying about strangers and how it's really good for us to talk to strangers, because it fires us up we, as you said, were saying, neurologically, it's also really good because that nothing is planned. We don't know the person, so it keeps our mind engaged. We listen more deeply. We don't go into this default sort of shutting down mode of oh, I know this person and I know what they're going to come out with next. We actually make more effort with strangers. So it's really, really good for us. And so I think for me, what came out of the conversation that you and I had is just not really do anything different, but actually just sort of, maybe the word is lean into possibilities for connecting with others a bit more at times, and how, you know, that's been something that I've worked on a lot, but particularly through the pandemic, having been so isolated for a long time and not being able to go back and see family in England, the travel ban and all of that. So this, for me at least, you know, terrible things happened in that time. And so there's a lot of trauma around that. And so I feel like I need to sort of lean into that and just be a little bit more open to possibilities with friendships. Yeah.
Now, the reason the game is designed with this question at the end is because we really wanted there to be a positive impact of each conversation. If, you know, we just had a lovely conversation, but nobody did anything different, then what was the point, really? So could I just press you a little bit on this? And if you're going to lean into friendship a bit more, could you think about when you might take the first step towards doing that in a very practical, concrete way?
Well, funnily enough, I've got this wonderful neighbour who was my saviour during the pandemic. She would send over cakes and all sorts of things that she baked, and, you know, sending me over a cake with love and coconut, you know, and things like that. And she's always saying, let's go out for dinner, and we haven't actually done that in the last year. So but we're always sending little texts, and we send funny messages to each other. So it would be good, I think, to set up a dinner date with her and just have some real downtime. I have gone round to hers for tea and had cake. She loves her cake. But it would be nice to sort of come out of her environment and go into a new environment together, where there's that sort of equal sharing and a new situation. I think that would be something really useful and beneficial for both of us.
Brilliant. And mine's quite similar, actually. There's a guy that I used to work with, and we became friends. And then he's retired now, and he moved to Bournemouth. And it must be, December, you know, it was like the Christmas exchange of messages type thing. And he said, you know, you must come down and visit sometime, and we're happy to put you up. So I said, yeah, that would be great. Let's think about it when the weather starts to get better. But we didn't actually pin down a date. So I'm going to get in touch with him, and we're going to finalize a date so that happens, rather than it remain, you know, one of these things that is just hanging.
Yeah, that sounds good. Very good. And you can't guarantee the weather's going to be nice when you're down there, but fix the date even so.
Yeah, exactly. So what we were thinking is, you know, March, April time. So now's the right time to start to put a date in. So Rachael, thank you so much for being willing to dive into this. I know that you said at the beginning that you're really happy to do it, which is great. I've loved the conversation, and I'm really happy with the actions that we both come up with, actually, because I think they're gonna be making a positive difference to us, and also the people that are involved in it as well, our friends.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.